Hey, welcome back to Practical Liberty. My name is Henry Bingaman. Today's episode is one that I almost didn't release. That's not because of the content or there was anything particularly controversial. The problem is there's a pretty severe lag on the video at a few points. And I think the problem was actually on my end. I had a couple dozen apps open during the recording, and I think it was just eating up too much memory. But the audio is pretty good, and I really enjoyed the conversation with my guest, Jaren Scott. So I'm putting it out anyway. Please just forgive any of the video snags if you watch that video version. And if you're listening to the audio, which is like 75, 80% of the audience, then none of this matters anyway. Anyway, in this conversation, we talk about Jaren's path to becoming financially and location independent. We talk about why he gave up his Porsche and penthouse in California to fitting almost all his possessions in a duffel bag and living in a bunch of different locations around the world. We get into Jaren's 10-point checklist for where to live around the world and a whole lot more. So now, with no further delay, here's my conversation with Jaren Scott. Everybody, welcome back to Practical Liberty. I have today Jaren Scott, who is in an entrepreneur group with me. Jaren, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I was looking really forward to coming on to this show. This usually isn't the type of content I produce, but as I mentioned on the pre-show, I was a staunch libertarian for years and years and years. It really shaped a lot of my political philosophy, going back to the Dr. No, Mr. Rand Paul, or not Rand, Rand's the son, Ron Paul. And so I realized with the current chaotic state we are in culturally and politically, especially in the United States, that I'm going to start getting back into these topics because to me, it appears that both sides or just everyone has lost their complete mind. And I really don't know why. I'd like to say I don't know what to do about it, but I am doing something about it. I'm location independent. I make all my money online, and I've managed to, after a very long struggle, get to the point where I can say that I'm truly free in my life. And I believe that should tie in nicely with your audience.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what the podcast is about. A lot of people want this type of lifestyle that you and I kind of have, where we are location independent. We do make our livings online. So let's talk about your background a little bit, because you're also in the digital marketing space. Yes. Only you went more into the corporate side of it, I believe. So can you kind of tell people how you got into the marketing side and some of the clients you've worked with in the past?
Yeah, actually, the reason I chose marketing, like any 18-year-old new college student, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had a radio show in high school for an educational radio type format. Eventually, this was back in the day. This was like 15 years ago, even more. No, God, I'm getting old. It was 20 years ago when we first got radio automation software. So there's a time there where everything was on mini disc, and I learned the software, got it down, and was able to automate a lot of the production. So I essentially became the station manager without the official title during that endeavor during my high school years. And going back forward to when I was a student, it's like, okay, I don't really know what to do with my career. I really enjoyed the radio thing. That's really one of the only things I enjoyed. I was really good at school. I was good at every subject, but I didn't really enjoy it. I was just like, okay, I have to do it to get ahead, and fell into that mindset of society dictating the successful formula for a life well lived. And I thought, well, I was on the radio. I'll go ahead and try to position my career in that direction. And I went to school to get a communications degree, and then I got a master's degree in communication. And anyone who knows, I did a video not too long ago, just the other day, in terms of why college degrees are worthless. I essentially picked some worthless college degrees. However, luckily, I was able to view where the market was going. About the time I was coming out of college, I knew that everything was going digital, although I had more of kind of a traditional marketing background as part of those degree requirements. So I just started learning my own skills on the job. Came out of school, I worked for a major defense contractor for the good part of my career. And then since then, I've been doing a lot of consulting. I've worked with early stage startups. I've worked with Fortune 500, 100, and even some top 10 companies. And I'd say that my experience digital marketing wise, it's a bit varied from yours in that I kind of stuck to that corporate path. The startup clients are great because you can get in and you can wear more hats, you have more autonomy, but it's also a lot more stressful. And a lot of times it's a lot more volatile if you're trying to plan a consistent career progression path. So I've kind of straddled both sides, working with the early stage startups and the very, very established multinational corporate conglomerates. And it got to the point where, with all of the wokeism starting to make its way into American corporate culture, that I realized, just as I did in academia, eventually there's not going to be a place for me. And I remember a couple of years ago, I fell into the whole lifestyle creep where I was living in California, had the high rise condos, driving a Porsche. I was working in fintech, making very good money compared to my peers. And I wasn't happy. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. I'd work late, 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 late. A lot of times I wouldn't even make it home until 12 p.m., maybe squeak out 4 hours of sleep if I'm lucky and just do it again. And I wasn't getting anywhere. I was spinning my wheels. So I had actually studied abroad for quite a bit of my undergraduate degree in Mexico and decided a few years ago that, you know what, I'm going to start positioning myself to get back to Mexico, allow myself some freedom in terms of my energy output in my professional life, and see what kind of creativity is allowed to surface when I'm not constantly stressed out, wondering where my next paycheck's going to go, even though I'm doing everything right. I made all the right financial decisions. So fast forward, and that's where I am now. The pandemic didn't really help. It threw a bunch of roadblocks in my place, but I'd say safely now I'm at the point where I can live the life that I've always wanted to live, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the future has in store for me.
Yeah, I love it all freelancers and like people that kind of unplug from the machine, for lack of a better term, and kind of forward their own path. I think I went with the direct response marketing companies because that's just the opportunities that fell in my lap in the beginning, whereas you went with the corporate companies and the startup culture because I'm guessing that's what fell in your lap in the beginning, right? You just take whatever opportunities are given to you and build from there.
Yep.
And we've both been able to have successful careers off of just kind of it's momentum, right? Most of
Yes.
of a career is just don't take your foot off the gas. Once you get a client, you just keep pushing. And that's built my career. Sounds like that's exactly what you did. So I'm curious because at one point you're not quite as much of a minimalist anymore. We had a conversation last week, but you
No.
were. So you went from the high rise with the Porsche to like dropping all your worldly possessions and living in Mexico. So what kind of inspired that decision? Like what made you want to get out of the States in the first place? Because you were moved before the pandemic, right?
Yeah, I was already on the path to do that, but the pandemic accelerated it. Really, it was just because I was living in Southern California in a very high rent place. I lived a very high expense lifestyle and realized that I essentially became slave to corporate culture and my own personal, or as you said, worldly possessions. So I was already mentally making that shift. I was decluttering, I was downsizing. A big influence for me was Aaron Clary's channel in terms of how to live life like a minimalist. And again, these were things I already inherently knew as a kid, that if you have very low expenses, then you have a lot more freedom. I've found out that well, at first I screwed up when I first went minimalist. I was like, okay, well, I only need very little money to live month to month. Ergo, I don't really have to work that hard, but you get tired of doing that after a while. So in California, COVID hit. It was about the time my lease was up. I was able to negotiate with the landlord that, hey, I'm going to sell everything. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to leave the country. Can you let me go month to month? He was cool with that. So that ended up working out really nicely for me from a timing standpoint. And then as that exit date from the apartment was fast approaching, I just started selling more and more stuff. Like you said, there's momentum. And at first, it's psychologically really tough. You look at your closet, you have all the suits, you have all the clothes for every occasion, you have all the shoes. I had a couple cars actually, and a bunch of guitars. I collect old stereo equipment, had a huge vinyl record collection. But as that date approached, I got more and more momentum. And the more stuff I got rid of, just the better and more free I felt. So I went more of an extremist route. And again, as that exit date was approaching, I got an offer from a client on a platform that we scaled and actually sold to a very, very large financial institution. They hit me up and said, "Hey, we want to launch some funds. We have some commercial financing services, but this whole pandemic thing, we don't know where to build a sales team, where to outsource operations." So we settled on El Salvador. About the time their new president was elected, he has done a bunch of reforms since then, and he's very, very foreigner friendly. A lot of people know El Salvador too because they're cracked down on the gangs, which I was there not too long ago. It gets better every time I go, and the whole Bitcoin thing. So I spent most of last year in El Salvador building that outsourced sales team, living out of essentially a duffel bag. So I really got everything down to an exact science as far as what is the bare minimum I need to survive. And in doing so, I was able to create a lot of opportunities for myself because people were like, "Hey, who's this gringo who speaks Spanish who went to El Salvador and built a sales team under a new right-wing dictator during the middle of a global pandemic?" that guy's got something going on for him. So people started throwing me more opportunities to provide creative solutions to complex problems. And since then, for the last year, I've been working with, I had one early stage software as a service startup that I was working with on a 6 month contract. And then I just got off a 6 month contract working for a very, very, very large multinational global corporation. So like I said earlier, I kind of straddle both sides there. But in terms of minimalism, it was great at first. It for the first year or two, I was really, really feeling free, really feeling cool. But then it got to the point where in the entrepreneur group we're involved in, I started hanging out with guys that are making like $100 million a year. I think we even have a couple billionaires in there, although they haven't admitted it. But you can do the math in your head. You're like, wait a second, like you have a nationally syndicated radio show and you are well known pretty much anywhere I travel. So you're probably doing something right there, bud. And so hanging out with these guys, I thought, well, you know what? I don't necessarily want to settle down. I want to keep the minimalist mindset, but I want to start making some money too. And when you're constantly on the road, it's really hard to set yourself into routine, to concrete habits, and to set very finite goals with a plan to achieve them, because there's always variables that are in flux. So I wanted to combine the best of both worlds. I didn't want to be stuck like I was in California, but I did want to have the freedom to travel whenever I wanted. So I made a 10-point checklist of things I'm looking for in a city that would ideally fall in line with my ideal lifestyle. And I started just eliminating cities that I was interested in. I've done quite a bit of traveling in my life too. Eliminating cities I thought, well, it'd be nice to live here, but would it be nice to live here, or is it just nice for 2 or 3 days on vacation doing the tourist thing? And the more and more I whittled down the list, Mexico City started bumping up and up based on the criteria I laid out for myself. So about a year ago, I did an exploratory trip for a month. Then I came back for 3 months. Then I came back for 6 months. And every time I'd go back to the US, I'd restock up on stuff. I started slowly bringing stuff down here. Again, just the bare essentials, things I need for an optimized day-to-day lifestyle. And then recently, I flew up to San Diego, got my Mexican residency, came down here and signed a year lease on a high-rise condo in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. So I'd say I still have the minimalist mindset. Again, I bought the bare essential that I need in the apartment, and so far, when I do like my daily walkthrough, as far as what do I need, what things are running out, what consumables do I need to order, there's really nothing I have that I don't need, and I plan on keeping it that way for a while.
Yeah, that's such a cool. So I know a lot of people that make multiple seven figures a year, and they are not free at all, right? They can't.
Yes.
They can't walk away from all their commitments. You know, they have a $50,000 a month mortgage or lease on some mansion that they want to live in, and they have to donate seven figures to charity a year. Which there's nothing wrong with donating to charity, but when you become a slave to that, like
Yeah.
that's what appeals to me about the minimalist lifestyle. And I don't really live a minimalist lifestyle, right? I have a couple cars, a house on 15 acres that I got to keep up, which is fully paid off.
Someday. I will someday too. I like my stuff.
Yeah, but the option of picking up and leaving is, I think, I don't know. So location independence is just an interesting concept, because it's not, most people don't want to move around the world, but it's nice to have the option, right?
Yes.
So what was it? Can you talk about that 10-point checklist? What was it about Mexico City that really attracted you there?
Yeah, I don't know if I can remember them off the top of my head, but a lot of them were perfect year-round climate. I hate the cold. That was the big one. Really good food, which anyone who's ever been to Mexico, the food down here is just amazing. In vain with that, cheap food. So I'm into the fitness space too. I'm not like a bodybuilder or fitness model or anything, but every quarter or so, I like to do a photo shoot just to kind of have a goal and make sure I don't let myself go too much. So protein dense, cost per or price per kilo for protein was a big one, because when I was in El Salvador, everything down there is imported. So protein is very, very expensive. I learned that lesson. Like, all right, to hit my bare minimum protein requirements for a day, I'm spending like $40 on food in a third world country. In Mexico, it's $5 to $10 a day I spend on food. So it was really examining my finances and seeing like, okay, what are the things I need once more, and then trying to get that cost down as much as possible. So that was a huge factor. I like ample public transportation. A big one for me was the ability to be a direct flight away from any major North American city. That's because I still do some corporate type contracts. And if they call me, hey, we need you in New York, can you be here in 3 days? Then the answer is yes. I can that same duffel bag. I still have my core minimalist kit from when I was doing the Central America stuff. So same duffel bag, sling it over my shoulder. I don't even unpack it. I was in California a couple of weeks ago. It's still sitting on my floor. Really, I just need to wash the clothes, repack it. And next time I go somewhere, that the bag's ready to roll. Also, one thing I didn't put on the 10-point checklist, which I would next time, adverse weather or climate. So when I lived in Houston for a few years, I was tired of getting flooded every year. So like, all right, I don't want this. Again, this didn't make it on this last list. I was reminded of that a few weeks ago when we had a big, I believe it was a 7.6 earthquake in Mexico City.
Wow.
And anyone who knows Mexico City history, they have big earthquakes. It always falls on September 19th, which is when they plan their earthquake drills here. So we had a big one, we had two actually that same day, one in the morning, then we had our earthquake drill. And then within an hour of the earthquake drill, we had like earthquake fatigue or evacuation fatigue. Then the big one hit and we knew it wasn't a drill. I was in the apartment and the whole building's swaying. I'm like, oh, these buildings fall over. So I flew down those stairs. Again, have that minimalist bag. It has everything I need. It has cash and pesos and dollars. It has all my bare minimum toiletry essentials. It has really anything I need that if I have to get out of here very quickly or even leave the country, I'm able to do that. So just slung that on my shoulder, flew down the stairs and came down. So again, guys are listening. If you're asking yourself this question, put something like that on the list. Like, are there floods? Are there hurricanes? Are there tornadoes? Maybe that's not a deal breaker. For me, it wasn't at all, but definitely I was shaken up after that earthquake. To pardon the pun there. Another big one was cheap domestic transportation. So Mexico has very, very diverse climates. It's a very diverse population too. A lot of people in the U.S. don't realize that. Based on where you live, you see someone that's Latino or Hispanic or Spanish speaking, and in a lot of places, especially in the Southwest of the United States, people assume, oh, they're Mexican, and they assume that all Mexicans look alike, they all talk alike, they all think alike. No, it's just as diverse as the U.S. Any state or even city, by that matter, they all look different, they speak differently, the food's different, the climate's different. So I wanted to be able to still scratch that travel bug while putting my head down and working for at least the next year and making that my prime focus. But every now and then I get tired of that. So the ability to get on a flight and go to any new climate or culture within the same country for less than $50 each way, that was a big one on my list also. I wanted a place where people would visit me. So when I was in El Salvador, no one was coming down to El Salvador to visit me. I think I had two guys come down, but they were more of your adventurous travel types. In Mexico City is a place where everyone's going. It's kind of like an Austin or Nashville or Miami. When you talk to people that are talking about leaving the country, Mexico City usually comes up in that conversation. So I don't really hang out too much with the expat community because a lot of them carried the same American mentality and mindset that I sought to escape. And I don't really want to bring that into my new life. But there is that possibility there. When I lived in Mexico years and years ago, there wasn't that big of a foreign population. So it was hard to find things like peanut butter, for example. But now any of your gringo goods, you can get them at any major US chain store. And there's also a lot more US influence down here too. Technology was a big one. So it's not as good as somewhere like Japan or South Korea, but the technology in Mexico, it's pretty comparable to the US if you live in the right area and you contract the right services. And then just overall cost of living. Being in El Salvador, and I went to Panama for a bit too, they're third world or developing nations, but they still use the US dollar. So they still have the same consequences as far as the whims in the market or inflation is huge. Being in a country like El Salvador, where it costs $40 a day to get ample protein, and the average person who makes a good living makes $300 a month, well, do the math. I didn't want to really live in a society like that. So the big thing for me was making US dollars, but paying in pesos. And those are, I know they're not all 10 items, but those are the big ones. And then another one too, a lot of topics I cover and some of our private communities we're involved in is in terms of building an all-around awesome lifestyle. It's a relationship aspect. I like Mexico because people are friendly here. When you walk down the street, people smile at you. And in the US, a lot of people don't realize this anymore. I know it depends on location, but when I lived in California, people are always angry. They're always tense. They always have a chip on their shoulder and they always have an agenda. And you know this when you come into any interpersonal interaction, and it starts to wear on you after a while. Whereas in Mexico, people are genuinely curious. They're genuinely nice. They're hospitable. And I really like being around that energy also. And in terms of the dating aspect, because I'm a white-blooded American male, the girls here are beautiful. They're fun. They're feminine. They're fit, and they're just a blast to be around. So that wasn't the top thing on my list. I believe it was number 10 of 10. But putting all those things together, I started to create a mental framework in my head of what my average awesome day would look like, and started moving in that direction. And so far, it seems like it's worked out. You know, there are a couple things I miss in the U.S. I miss the just ridiculously cheap food and humongous portions. I always get fat when I go back home. I miss my cars, I miss my guns, and I miss my guitars. But aside from that, I've lived a pretty good life down here.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine you could replace the guitars. I don't know. Are the gun laws crazy down in Mexico City? Like, is it pretty much banned firearm
Yeah, they're
ownership?
pretty much banned anywhere. I had a buddy come down a couple weeks ago from one of our private groups we're involved in, and we were trying to go shooting. And really, the only place you can go, it's an Israeli military base, but neither of us are Jewish, so that was that was not a possibility. You can go to shooting ranges, but they're BB guns with like the little orange tips,
That's
and for me, that just doesn't do it. Like if I'm going to shoot a kid's gun, I'll just shoot a 22 and just run through the rounds. There you can throw axes, you can do archery, but yeah, guns are very, very illegal. However, they are not hard to come across. A lot of people they complain about, oh, the cartels are bringing all the drugs to the U.S. You're like, no, actually it comes the other way. They bring guns and actually legal marijuana from California down here. So they're moving commerce the other way, which I didn't realize at the time either.
so what's the culture like? You were saying everybody's friendlier, which is, I lived in Philadelphia for over 10 years, and it was a cool culture. Like I loved the restaurants, but it was pricey and everybody's an asshole. I don't know if you know Philadelphia's reputation. And when I moved out to like the middle of nowhere, we have tourists come up. If somebody said jerk out here, they're tourists. They're from Jersey or New York or Philly. Everybody that's local is friendly. But I had another conversation with a Mexican expat, somebody that moved down to, oh, I forget the area. She's south of Guadalajara. But she's,
Lake Chapala.
oh yeah, that sounds right. One of the things she was talking about is how friendly everyone is. Can you hear me? Looks like did we lose connection here? All right. So we were talking about, I think we were talking about guns at the point. Oh no, we were talking about the culture down in Mexico. So I've been reading some articles about the local Mexico City, especially residents aren't super happy with the number of American expats there. Are you noticing this? So is it different for you? Because most Americans that go down there, they don't bother to learn Spanish, right? They don't try to assimilate at all. That's kind of the American arrogance. It's a cliche, but it's also very true. So do you run into that hesitancy, that resistance to you, or because you're kind of merging with the culture a little bit more, you don't have that as much?
I'd say yes and no. So like when my gringo buddies come down, like good example, the other day I was going to pick up my groceries. I have them delivered right here to the house. Went downstairs and there were a couple people outside and they weren't too sure the security protocols of how to get in. You got to leave your ID, you have to register. They check you to make sure you're not, bringing guns or anything in. And then you can go up to visit your guest. And I noticed kind of passively, I wasn't paying attention, and then that there was a language barrier issue. And then suddenly I turned around and thought, hey, you guys don't speak Spanish, do you? I'm assuming if you don't speak Spanish, you speak English. Even if you're not from an English speaking country, English is the international language that people speak. And like, oh yeah, thank you so much. How do we do this, or how do we run through it? And I could see on the security guard's face that there's a bit of frustration there. And I think that's that attitude you referred to, just kind of letting itself out in a natural way. When my gringo friends come to town, we do more American friendly type activities because of the language barrier for my guests. So I get more of that sentiment directed towards me as far as being a part of that type of environment. But in my day-to-day life, I live in a neighborhood. There's not a lot of foreigners here. I haven't heard any other Americans, at least in the elevator. There are English speakers here because I live in a high class part of town. And I know that this isn't PC to say, but in most countries outside of the US, your English proficiency level is correlated with your income level and your education level. So in the universities down here, you're required to speak English to a certain degree of proficiency to even get a degree. And that's another thing. I went to one of the best universities in Mexico years ago. I didn't realize it at the time. I was just a young kid and wanted an adventure, and did a direct exchange. And the student who went to my home university in my place, every semester he texted me. They had a really good engineering program. He was an engineering student, and I wanted to study more of like kind of your classical Western culture. So I did study the liberal arts, but at a very conservative, very classical university, so I'm very fortunate for that education level. But at the time, I didn't even realize it was a good school. So when I speak, people understand that naturally I have an accent, but it doesn't sound like a staccato broken gringo accent. It sounds actually more like a South American accent, and I have theories based on that. In terms of the way like facial features or whatever, you'll notice that certain demographics of people, regardless what language they speak, it might be more nasally, it might be more guttural, which is in the throat. So I think it has something to do with that. I just naturally sound like I'm from more European based Spanish speaking culture. So people are usually intrigued when I open my mouth. From a grammatical and academic standpoint, I speak Spanish at a very, very high level because I did go to one of the best universities in the country, and the curriculum was quite rigorous. In fact, when I meet people in the U.S., like, oh, I went to Harvard, I went to Yale, I went to Princeton, and you talk to them, you're like, I got a better education than you in Mexico, which is abundantly clear by the things we talk about and the way that we structure our thoughts. So I think that really, really helped me out too. I play guitar too, so I'm sure my neighbors hear me at night, but I belt out the old Spanish folk songs, and I can nail the notes. But again, there's a slight little accent there. But personally, I've never had any issues as long as I stay outside of the gringo circles, and I don't intentionally try to stay outside of the gringo circles. I'd just rather not hang out with those types of people because you get the same coastal elite type people that again I wanted to get far, far away from by leaving the U.S.
Yeah, I don't. It's funny. I think a lot of people that go to Harvard and Columbia and Yale get educated out of their intelligence. Like
Yes,
they would have been smarter if
that.
if they didn't have those classes in the first place. It's a tragedy, really, how much how much those universities are ruining the culture. So I want to talk about safety a little bit down in Mexico because
Yep.
it's one of the things that, especially, you're not allowed to have guns, so you can't protect yourself the way
No,
I have a safe full of AR-15s and shotguns. So
I'm sure you do.
anybody that comes out here is going to have problems. But so what is the security safety situation down in Mexico City?
It really depends on where you go. So the other night in my YouTube recommended videos, a documentary came on for a place here in town. It's not too far. I can actually see it from my window, called Tepito, which they're like, I think they said something, there's 100 murders a day in that area, but and US cities used to do this too. They don't do it anymore, but they used to, in terms of, hey, listen, violence is going to occur. Crime is going to exist. Let's try to condense it and concentrate it as much as possible so we can just keep it from spilling out into the rest of civilization. So the area I live in right now, it's a very, very wealthy area. I've had high net worth earner friends come down and they're like, hey, man, do I got to watch out walking down the street? I'm like, dude, Mexico is one of the largest economies in the world. They'll be number 10 by the year 2030. So, and they're a huge population. I believe there's like 130 million people here. So even if it's the smallest fraction of a percentage of people that have that super high wealth, well, they live here. They live in my neighborhood. They're my neighbors. So I'm personally not concerned about it, just from that sense that, hey, there's better targets if someone does want to get some money out of them. And also, too, one thing you learn, and this is something I remember back when I studied here, I would notice this, that I had to have more situational awareness and be more vigilant at all times in Mexico. So things you might take for granted previously in the US, it's actually changed in the US now. Actually, I was in San Diego, California a few weeks ago with a buddy. Walking downtown with all the homelessness there, I felt way, way more insecure and that my safety might be a concern than I ever did anywhere in Mexico, even in dangerous places in Mexico during the peak of the drug war, a little more than a decade ago. And really, it comes down to situational awareness, just being aware of your surroundings at all times. So little things you learn. For example, I did get robbed once in Guadalajara. I got held up at knife point, but it's because I wasn't watching my P's and Q's. My mind was elsewhere. Things like don't have the same exact routine. My routine varies. There's 8 different gyms that I can go to within a 2-kilometer radius for me. So I vary my gyms. I vary the time I go. I vary the routes I take. It's probably overkill for the nice neighborhood I live in, but these are things I learned in the past. And I've lived in more dangerous countries too, much, much more dangerous countries. When people are concerned about Mexico, it's like, oh, Mexico's nothing compared to like Central America or some of these Caribbean island nations.
Yeah.
And little things like yesterday I was walking to the gym and there was a cement barricade without any areas to where you can exit from that, right against a building facade at the sidewalk there. So I don't ever walk down those closed off spaces to where I can't get the hell out of there very quickly. Or if you see like 2 sketchy looking guys, and again, PC culture has made us think in ways that are just completely asinine. You know what sketchy people look like. If they're
Yeah.
people that don't look like they belong in the neighborhood, it's not a racial thing, it's not an ethnic thing, it's not a nationality thing. People that don't belong, or people that are committing behaviors or actions that seem out of place. You need to be wary of those things. And eventually, when you do it enough, you kind of train your brain. You just automatically know. If I'm walking home and there's two pretty big guys that look like they're out of place and they're standing on my side of the street, I'll just cross the road, or I'll just go around the block, or I'll take a different way. So it's really just minding your P's and Q's, being situationally aware, being not hyper vigilant because that can provoke some anxiety, but just being vigilant, being aware of your surroundings. A big thing too, which in more rural parts of the U.S. people still practice this culturally, but getting to know your neighbors. For example, I told the story of the security guard. I know all the security guards. I know all the people that work at the little tiendas here nearby in the neighborhood. I know my neighbors. There's a private Jewish school across the street, which I didn't realize when I moved in here. That's actually a good thing because they have tons of security. Anyone who travels internationally, you know that if you meet someone from Israel or a Jewish person and you want to go to their hotel or you want to hang out with them, there are so many layers of security you have to go to because internationally, well, they're less liked than even Americans for that matter.
It's
And
5,000
and
years
again,
of people trying to kill you. It makes you a little paranoid about security.
exactly, yeah, it makes you kind of look out at your surroundings. So again, I'm really deliberate with the way I plan and I structure my life. So these are all factors I took into consideration. Some things I got lucky on, like the heavy security. Some things unlucky, like oh yeah, they have earthquakes here, and they're pretty scary. Um, but in general, and not, like I said, I recommend practicing these tips and tricks too when you're in the U.S. because walking around any major U.S. city, one thing I always say in terms of violence is usually a result of poverty. Poverty is a result of lack of education, maybe lack of opportunity, whatever that is. But I'm seeing more and more of that in the U.S. And the difference between the U.S. and Mexico is in the U.S., our culture promotes it. For whatever reason, when you go through a major California city, I'm the only person walking down the street saying, like, this is ridiculous. This is unacceptable. How the hell did you let this happen? And these California coastal liberals look at me like, oh my God, like I'm the asshole.
Yeah.
I'm the guy who has a problem that I'm not cool with people crapping in the street. In Mexico, you don't get that. You just get poverty, and poverty, it's just lack of resources. So poverty is a little more predictable. Like, yes, you might have some petty crime. Another trick is if you leave the house, I don't ever take like passport ID or any of that stuff. I take whatever cash I need, and that's it. When I got held up at knife point years ago, all they took was my cell phone, but I had an insurance policy on it. Literally that same day, I walked a couple blocks away, got a brand new cell phone. And it was actually time for me to upgrade anyway. So they did me a favor technically. So yes, there are security considerations to take into mind, but as long as you know they're there, and you plan around them, you'll be absolutely fine. Another question people ask me all the time is like, oh, well, what about the cartels? Like, okay, well, y'all are watching too much Narcos on Netflix. Knock that shit off, because most Mexicans are actually very, very taboo against organized crime, any cartel stuff, or drugs. They're a very, very religious and Catholic society. Mexico City, not so much. It's a major international cosmopolitan city, so they're a little more liberal here. I'd equate it to kind of U.S. cultural liberalism in the 1990s is kind of how it looks and feels. But the rest of Mexico is very, very traditional. And again, people have tight community bonds. They have very strong family structures, not just the immediate family, the entire family. And when you get out of the city, they have a lot of kids. So to be honest, I really feel more secure in that sense, as long as I have a good community ties, I have a good network, I know my neighbors, I know those around me. And in terms of the cartel question, really, they're a business. They're a Fortune 100 company, and as long as you stay out of their way. I've even met people like they're in all rungs of society and government. That nice university I went to, there was a lot of kids there where you'd meet their parents like, hey, what do you do for a living? I dated a girl one time actually, and he's like, oh, I install car stereos. It's like, oh, cool. He had a Maserati at the time. This must have been like 2007, 2008. And he was in the garage. I was like, hey, like, why don't you upgrade the stereo? Like you have all these stereo shops. Like, oh, I'll spend a weekend and you know, crack some beers and we can do it. Cause I really enjoyed at the time in a former life, I really enjoyed doing customized car audio. And at one point, I realized pretty quickly the guy didn't know what he was doing. Like even in terms of disconnecting the battery, like take the negative terminal off first. No idea. And at one point, in the installation, I'm like, hey, like, do you really install car stereos? And he looked at me dead in the eye, like kind of, shit-eating grin, kind of like the one that I do from time to time. And he asked me, he's like, do you want to keep asking questions, or you just want to have a really good time dating my daughter? And this was a very wealthy family. So I had access to exotic cars. I had access to exotic real estate on either of the Mexican major coasts. And I was like, you know what? And that moment is where I formed that philosophy. It's like, yeah, you know what? I don't need to ask questions that I don't want answers to. I don't really care. And as long as I treat his family well, and to this day, they still adore me. I don't hang out with them. He doesn't live in Mexico anymore because a lot of the wealthy ones get out of here, especially if you're involved in that stuff. But still have a good relationship with the family. She's married now, has kids, but she was like my college girlfriend when I was 19, and I was with her for a few years. So really, it's just keeping that mindset that you'll come across these people you'll likely never know. They dress like you and I. Again, they don't dress like Netflix narcos with the yellow Mexico filter that you always see on the movies. They're just normal people, suit and tie. I mean, it takes some very intelligent people to run an operation of that size. So I probably do come across them. I hang out at high class places. I go to places where people who are someone congregate, and if it does come up, I literally just tell them like, hey, I'll stay in my lane, you stay in yours. Like as long as I'm not doing business with you, your business is none of my business. And I think that's the correct attitude to take pretty much in all areas of life too.
Yeah, I guess if you're not a direct competitor with them, there's really no reason for them to mess with you at all. But like I'm headed to Chicago in a week or two, and Chicago has a notoriously high murder rate, but I'm not worried about it because I'm not going to those places and I'm not interacting with people that are likely to shoot me. It's funny. There was actually on one of my local neighbors groups, there was, we have a bit of a meth situation up in the rural area where I live because
God, the whole US does. It's insane.
Somebody robbed a local gas station with a sword. The description was hilarious. It was like man in
awesome.
Gray sweatshirt, like gym shorts and flip flops robs local like 7-Eleven with a sword. It's like, yeah, that's a meth person. But those are the people you just avoid. Like that's, the whole world has criminals and people that will take your stuff if you're not paying attention.
And to be honest, in the neighborhood I live in, the only homeless people I ever see, again, there's Mexican homeless people, but they're not homeless. They're out there. You'll see like the old lady who has her grandkids selling candy, or you'll see people juggling at the intersections or putting on a little show for you. You'll see like street comedians and stuff, but you don't see the crazy people with their pants around their ankles with shit running down the back of their legs. In San Diego, we saw people just openly having intercourse, like in midday. San Diego, less than 3 blocks from the police station. Nobody did or said anything about it. You do not see that in Mexico. Like you do see poverty here. Again, not in the neighborhood I'm in, but when you go outside of the city, you do see poverty, but you don't see this absolute, just out of your mind, meth fueled craziness like you do in the US.
Yeah. We don't really have a homelessness problem in the US. We have an open market drug problem.
Exactly.
That's what California is just. It's amazing to me that you were talking about the people that they're trying to be compassionate, human beings by letting that go, but it's the opposite of compassion. You're letting people die in their own shit in the middle of the street and shoot up drugs. Like it's not okay. Like I don't know why they think they're being compassionate. Yeah, and people, they don't take their own safety. Like you are responsible for your own safety everywhere in the world, right? Yes. You have to have, your head on a swivel sometimes. Like just be aware of what's going on in the world. It's like, it's not okay to get robbed or raped in an alley, right? But also don't go down that alley at midnight.
Exactly.
There's certain basics that people should be aware of. So Mexico's, it sounds like it's the same situation there that is in the rest of the world. There's enough money that it's not, people that have some money don't want the crime around them, right? Rich neighborhoods don't have the same crime problems that poor neighborhoods do. So just avoid the poor neighborhoods.
And even people that don't have the money here, again, they're firmly rooted in their Catholic faith. Most of them, you do get some Protestantism. There's some Mormonism in the northern states. I'm in a large Jewish community, so there's a lot of diversity here. You get some of like the more native traditions, but in general, there's a shared cultural belief that family and God come first. So as long as you're strongly rooted in those beliefs, and I'm not advocating one religion or another, I think they all have a degree of credence to them personally, but really I think when you have those strong societal values, those shared values, and that core societal fabric, and it's more or less quilted into like a tight knit picture, then you really don't have those issues as much. Again, you have poverty, and poverty does show up in different ways, but in the US, walking down the street and just crazy people just yelling at the air, trying to fight invisible people. You don't see that in Mexico. Years ago you'd see like the alcoholics. Mexico City had a bad like street children problem. I don't know what they did with those people, but you don't see that anymore. And to be honest, a lot of times people don't really care. When I was in El Salvador, the new president got a lot of gruff from the international community as far as, oh, you might be suspending these people's human rights or right to a fair trial, whatever. But it's pretty obvious who's an MS-13 gang member or not in El Salvador. And a lot of them were deported under Trump. So you'd be walking around, you'd see these guys all tatted up, face tattoos, and a lot of them would come up to me and talk, and they'd be like, oh man, you're not scared. I'm like, no, you should be scared because you're a Salvadorian with tattoos who lives in El Salvador is the Bible Belt of Central America. They're very, very conservative and extremely religious. So they get this influx of these like hard and nasty LA criminals who don't even speak Spanish. Well, they're pariahs in that society. So they'd actually seek guys like me out like, oh man, I never felt so American until I got deported. I'm like, well, shouldn't have committed crime in the US when you don't have papers. Again, I'm an asshole if I say this at home, but it's pretty obvious. I have my legal status in Mexico. I'm never going to join a march. Down here, they use the feminists as their useful idiots, whereas the US tries to invoke the race war, which is disgusting to try to keep scraping that societal scar and make it bleed again. In Mexico, they do the feminist thing. So it's the feminists that defile statues, that deface government buildings. And if I ever joined any of those groups, I would expect to just get my ass completely handed to me by the police because this is not my country. This is not my home. I am a guest. I am being hosted very well. But any of that mindset of, oh, we should destroy our cultural artifacts or start pulling thread by thread out of that societal seam that's so important of holding a culture together, it's just completely beyond my mind why anyone would think that that is okay.
I don't know, man. Sounds like you're promoting toxic masculinity to me. You patriarchal.
Yeah. I'm so toxic. Yeah, I really am. I'm a younger white guy with a high college education that does pretty well for myself, has no debt, and I am outside of the system. So I know that in mainstream, the corporate, academic, governmental cabal in the U.S. that I am an enemy. And actually, you know what? On my list of top 10 things, that was a big thing too. In terms of countries that don't extradite, like Mexico does have some treaties, like they extradited El Chapo, obviously, for crimes that he was wanted for in the drug transportation industry in the United States. But in terms of guys getting behind a microphone and saying things that might piss off people in the U.S., yeah, they don't extradite for that. And if I need to get out of Mexico, I always tell people there's a reason I do the things I do. So I have very good relationships in El Salvador. Let's just say that it's a very small country. It's about the size of San Diego. In my career in San Diego, I've met every mayor there. Let's just say that in El Salvador, compared to population size, it's very easy to get in with the right people. So if anything hits the fan in the US and Mexico, I have safe haven in, ironically, of all places, El Salvador, which is actually shaping up pretty nicely. And one more thing in terms of safety, I think the last data I checked before I decided to make my move to Mexico, it was equivalent safety rise as far as not overall murders or violent crimes, because the population is just so high. When you have 30-40 million people, you're gonna have some crime no matter where you're at in the world. But in terms of incident per 100,000, it's about on par with Seattle prior to the 2020 election. Obviously, there's a crime spike in the U.S. I think in some cities on the West Coast, it's as high as like 800%, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas Mexico's kind of going the other way. Their economy is actually this isn't like an official economic outlook, but in terms of just living here, it seems like I've seen the middle class grow and the poverty go down. And then, there's the high class is pretty highly protected here if you're not with the foreign community. So they're kind of the Mexican elite. They're kind of in their own league. So I'm seeing things moving in the right direction here. I'm seeing things move in the wrong direction in the US. I hope that changes soon. I hope both countries do very, very well. But I'm the type of guy, I don't like being on a losing team. So I'll take my talents elsewhere.
What is the economy like? Is the peso pegged to the dollar? First of all, I don't actually know too much about the currency down there.
It was after they had their financial crisis. I believe it was 93, 94 when the peso had mass devaluation. So they created the new Mexican peso. They did peg it to the dollar at first, but I believe there was some inflation here at one point. When I studied here 15, 16, 17 years ago, it was always 10 to 1. Because when you do the conversions in your head, you always just drop the zero. Now it hovers around 20 to 1. Some days it's 19, some days it'll go as high as 21 or even 22. So it's about 20 to 1.
So it's good to get paid in dollars down there.
Oh, it's great to get paid in dollars down here. Once I did the conversion, this apartment I'm in, and again, it's a penthouse apartment, 2 bedrooms, bigger than any place I ever had in California. Same exact view. I literally have the same setup I did in San Diego. My place looks exactly the same, like down to the model of the stereo equipment. I like old school stereo, so had to do some searching to find the vintage gear that I wanted, but did the same exact setup for a fraction of the cost to do it all in California, and I'm paying about $1,000 a month, all said and done. And this is like one of the nicest areas in Mexico, obviously. And when I was doing my exploratory trips, I thought, well, if I go a few neighborhoods up, I can get that down to half the price. But then you're in the type of neighborhood where you're like, you know what, the extra $100 a month for just my safety, peace of mind, quiet nights, it's worth it.
Yeah, I imagine that's crazy. 2 bedroom for $1,000 a month. The last rent I was paying in Philly before I bought a house was, and I bought a house and then the mortgage, they doubled the tax rate basically on us. So the mortgage went
Yep.
from 4,000 to 5,000 a month for a 3 bedroom house, but the rent before that was 2,500 for a 2 bedroom. So like, you're just saving so much money living in an apartment down there. That's crazy.
Yeah, you mentioned taxes. Let's talk about that real quick. So living in California, I know that it keeps going up since I've left, but there was one point when I still had student loan debt too, and I still carry some, but I have it consolidated. It's like 1.9%. So I'm just letting inflation pay off my debt for me
Yeah.
at this point, and then not not restricting my cash flow. And I was investing, but pretty much across every asset class, everything's going down for me. So I'm
That's,
like, all right, I'm just stacking cash, looking for opportunities at this point. But in terms of taxes in California, there was a point where once I got my income high enough, I'm like, all right, between state, federal, local property, between whatever, I'm paying 51% in taxes. I am now a slave to the state. At
mhm.
that time, I did the calculation and factored in student loans. Yes, I understand it's my debt that I have a moral obligation to pay it back. But it's still money in my head that's going to the US government, to the US Treasury. So there was one month I paid 76% of my total income to either the US state or local government. And that really started influencing my thinking too. Like, this is ridiculous. I'm not doing that. So, my tax situation isn't too sophisticated yet. I believe that there's usually a financial milestone you get to where you have to start taking those into consideration. So, just on a regular W-2 or 1099 type contract, thankfully I grew up in Washington State, so I use the same address that the family's had since what, 1950 or so. There's a farm there. If anyone wants to go and threaten my family, my brother and all of his retired wounded Marine buddies, they'll be there waiting for you. Have fun, fellas. So again, these are things I took into consideration, but tax-wise, Washington doesn't have a state income tax, which helps you out. I still have to pay the federal. I still have to pay, what is it, the Medicaid, Medicare, all that. When you look at your deductions on your pay stubs, all of those random little codes that go up every time you get paid. You're like, okay, well, my salary's not going up, but taxes are going up, and I don't see society excelling. So that was one thing for me where I was like, all right, I need to reduce the tax burden too, and then there are creative ways around that. So even if I get paid in dollars, if I have them deposit it to a Mexican bank account, then oh well, let's just
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Location.
and also one thing, Mexican government doesn't charge taxes for digital nomads. So it's a residency visa type. You get your temporary residency first, and then after so many years, you can apply for your permanent residency or citizenship. But the Mexican government has pretty much turned a blind eye on people that are deriving their income from foreign sources. So the locals won't tax you either. If you buy digital products or stuff online, they may charge you a value added tax. But I just turn on my VPN, set it to LA, and I just bypass that.
That's awesome. Yeah, people don't realize the impact your location can have on your tax burden. Like when I moved out of Philadelphia, I saved, I think it was $55,000 a year in taxes, just not paying the city tax anymore. It is insane what you can do just by moving.
That's a full time income that you're paying every year. It's
Yeah,
asinine.
it's insane. I mean, it's insane how much they disincentivize people making money, because that's what tax is really. It disincentivizes people
It
from
is.
working. So it's cool that Mexico doesn't charge tax on that. We're coming up on an hour here. I do want to talk about your YouTube channel a little bit.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
So what kind of topics you have? Kind of a very diverse topic list that you cover. It seems to be some entrepreneurship, some dating, some fitness. So what was kind of the reason you started the channel, and what do you think you want to focus on the most there?
Yeah, at the time I started the channel, again, going back to why I got into marketing in the first place, those years that I spent in high school on the radio with my buddies and really getting that down, that's something I always wanted to go back to. However, I realized that terrestrial radio, although it is an overlooked marketing medium, I tell clients
Yeah.
all the time, like, oh, we need to reach this certain demographic. I'm like, AM radio ads. Like, I
Dirt
helped a
cheap.
buddy. Yeah, I helped a buddy in Miami a couple of years ago. They launched a managed Amazon and Walmart store service, and all of their ads were delivered over AM radio. And surprisingly, you'd get like your more rural people, you get older people, and you get like a lot of trucker types. Like, hey, I want to make passive income. It was $25,000 upfront investment. It's about 12 to 13 months to get going to where you start seeing a return. But then the company manages everything for you, and they got all their success on AM radio ads. So I realized that, okay, I want to get back into doing some kind of broadcasting. Really, and all broadcasting is, it's just sharing ideas, putting them out there for debate, to where people can. I always use the analogy: put it in their mouth, chew it up, swish it around, spit it out, and put it back together. I wanted to be involved in that, and I enjoyed very much my digital marketing career, and I still work in digital marketing. That's where I make the most of my money right now. But it was to the point where the culture is getting so bad in the U.S. And I get accused all the time. People are like, "Oh, you're talking bad about the U.S." Like, oh no, au contraire. I love the United States. In fact, when I meet girls down here dating, they ask, "Well, how do you just describe yourself?" I tell them I'm a classical American. And I've tested that term in the dating market. That term works. They know what that means. Everyone knows what American classical music is, what a classical car is. So why would they not know what a classical American is? And that term works very well for me. But the YouTube channel was more so that I was becoming not a victim. I don't like that word, but I was suffering more and more the consequences of not having full control and freedom in my life, not being the architect of my own universe. So once I started shifting those mindsets, and I saw very quickly, almost immediately, just how much better you feel. You can sleep well. You're healthy. You don't get sick anymore. When you're free and when you're fit, you don't get sick anymore, like ever. When this whole COVID thing happened, like, okay, obviously smart people knew it was BS the whole time. Here in Mexico, it's ironic because it's the opposite of the US. In the US, if you're educated, I use that term in quotes, those are the people that fell into the propaganda. In Mexico, it's the opposite. The educated class, they knew it was BS from day one. They inherently distrust their government because, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's something that's it's a natural law. That's something everyone knows. So I was getting more and more frustrated with this, not because I had suffered before. I think I'm quite resilient, and I was able to see things for the way they were and start structuring my life in a way that made sense for me to be healthy, happy, and fit. But then I noticed that a lot of people around me, I started getting ahead, and people around me were just getting pulled down more and more. And I was wondering why. Like, well, what is going on? These people are perfectly capable. These are people that were maybe ahead of me at one point, even not too long ago, like within a year or two ago. Why are they falling into this cultural pitfall of just despair and darkness, where I'm out here trying to conquer the world in my own right? And I wanted to start sharing those topics because I started getting angry after a while, especially too, once you start stepping outside of the system, you realize just really how stacked the deck is against you. And this isn't me trying to get into like socialist type rhetoric or anything, but ironically, it's the people that used to be against the system that now are the system. I remember like 1990s, early 2000s liberalism, or I grew up outside of Seattle. So the 1990 WTO riots, these same people are now on the side of the corporation. So for me, I'm like, all right, something crazy is happening in the world. I know I'm not the only one that sees it. And for years, I thought I was insane. I fell into I got to go to a psychologist and psychiatrist. And they put me on all sorts of meds. They medicated me when I was a kid. They said I had ADHD. No, I was a smart kid in a stupid school. So I've always been wired this way. But now, since I'm truly free, which allows those parts of my personality to come out, and I can show up in the world and be my true self at all times because I'm not beholden to anyone. My world changed me very quickly, and I just wanted to share that with people. I covered a lot of the dating topics because that's what gets a lot of guys to these types of spaces. They have horrible divorces, they lose access to their kids, half their money is going out in terms of child support or alimony or a combination of both. I mean, they just get absolutely ran through the ringer. So that's usually what brings a lot of guys to content like mine. And a lot of it's like, hey man, how do I get laid? How do I get the girls? And that's more of a top of the funnel type activity. Plus on YouTube, there's a lot of bad information out there. You'll see these mass produced channels. You're like, oh yeah, man, don't text her back for 2 days. Okay, well, she has 10,000 followers on Instagram. Do you know how many hundreds of messages she's getting a day? I'm a dude. I am overwhelmed in inbound communication. So if someone's not at the top of my list in my inbox or at the top of my mind, I'm going to forget they even exist. So bad advice. And I see that more and more. And really, my channel started off as a blog originally. I was anonymous. I was kind of going through my own stuff, and I thought, well, I don't want to reveal my face or put myself out there. But then I got to the point, it's like, well, you know what? If I can't put my face online, or if I can't put my name behind what I say, then it's probably something not worth saying. So that really helps me structure my thinking more, which in turn helps me structure my life even more. So those are the things I want to share with guys. It's mostly online dating type topics, fitness topics, location independence. If you have any questions about Mexico, I'll probably start covering more of those. At some point, maybe I'll do some Spanish stuff, and then I need to do a little bit of vocal training and get a solid studio set up with an adequate acoustic environment. But I'll probably start recording some music in the next year or two. So really, I know my channel is quite varied. From a marketing guy, I'm really trying to find my niche and hone in the brand. But it seems like when I tackle these varied interest topics, that people are getting more of a dynamic composite of who I am as a person. And really, the core message is that you can do this too. There's a piece of you that died when you were a kid that society just squeezed out of you. That part of you is still alive. I always loved playing guitar as a kid. Family, not that they openly disapproved of it, but more focus was on academia and sports. So I just it was my own insular introverted activity I do at night. So I thought, you know what, like really just getting back to my roots. When I was a kid, if I had a rough day, I just play guitar, and just all of that emotion gets let out via music. It's a vehicle. So I started doing that again. Big thing I got into is designing my perfect day. Like, okay, what does a perfect day look like? And the more you can replicate that, then you're going to have a compounding effect in terms of success in life. So those are the types of topics my channel covers. I'm quite academic when I break things down. So a lot of times things I already know intuitively, because I've gone through the work, I've tested the variables, and I've come to more or less a concrete way of going about certain areas of my life. Well, now I just want to share that with people.
Yeah, I think there's something to like we kind of align on our personalities in that we don't really we're like classical men in a world that doesn't like that anymore. And I think there are a lot of people, the dating stuff does get some interest. I've seen it's easy to go down that rabbit hole, right? Of like how to talk to women.
Am I alpha or am I beta?
Yeah.
You're like, if you're asking the question, you know the answer.
But I think most people like just watching dudes like us try to figure out the world, because it's a crazy place. And we know there's things that are going incredibly wrong. And we've both had some success in navigating that. So I think people are kind of drawn to that, which is why our channels are having somewhat successful launches. I guess we're both still kind of new. But what's the name of your channel so we can send people over there?
Yeah, the name was Men Shrine. So that's a website. That's where the blog started. It's menshrine, MENSHRINE.com. I've rebranded the channel now to do my regular name, Jaren Scott. I send most of my traffic to Instagram at Jaren Scott, JarenScott, for you audio only folks out there. And really me personally, because I know a lot more than just like the men's self-development stuff, the dating stuff, TRT, fitness. So I want to start expanding my reach, because there's a lot of stuff I spend a lot of time studying on, or a lot of things I spend a lot of my time working with myself on, that I want to get out there that extends outside of that more kind of men's pro masculinity type environment. And also, to be honest, I mean, I want to be YouTube friendly. YouTube is a major content hosting platform, and I want to play by the rules, and I want to get out there. Again, these are top of the funnel type activities, which is why you'll see I just uploaded a video today, like, would you date an OnlyFans girl? Well, I did my keyword research, and that was identified as a potentially high performing video, and I did all my strategy there. So we'll see how it starts doing. The one I did yesterday is doing considerably better than my other videos. So starting to wedge my way into these spaces to catch these people at the top of the funnel. And then as I move them down, they can join the private communities. They can pay for premium products. They can get more one-on-one FaceTime with me, and then actually like start breaking things down, because a lot of people, they believe they're a victim to reality. And that's one thing I never believed. And I always believed that I was the architect of my universe, and the world merely responds to me, how I present myself to it. There are things I disagree with. There are things I understand I can't change, but I can change that in my immediate environment. I can create my own bubble. I can create my own circle of people, and then really be just kind of isolated from all that stuff I disagree with. So again, it really comes down to, I think my main goal is just to teach people how to think at the end of the day, but you have to start somewhere. So am I alpha? Am I beta? How do I text a girl? How do I set up my online dating profile? Well, it's 100% visual app. Take good photos, because, I never realized that. Why am I not getting matches? You don't have any photos. Like just really basic things. And I always say the way I navigate the world, I'm a curious kid. I always have been. I'm a lifelong student, which means, I like to teach too, but it really comes down to just observing the world. Step outside of yourself, your ego, your preconceived notions of how things should be, your own biases, and just observe things. The answers are all right in front of you. You know, input or intake that information through your two eyes, connect it to your brain that we all have, and make your own assumptions, make your own observations. So a lot of the content I present, people say, "Oh, it's controversial." It's like I'm a referee. I'm just calling what I see. I don't think I'm right. I could be wrong, but let's have a dialogue. Let's discuss. Let's have a civilized debate. And I see this on my channel all the time. I don't see any other content creators that do that. They say, "Oh, like and subscribe." I always say, "Hey, if you don't like this, get the hell out of here. Unsubscribe." I don't want you as my follower because you might be an idiot, and that's not the movement I'm trying to create here.
Yeah, I had one person comment on a YouTube channel or on one of my videos that really great stuff. I just hope you don't try to sell me something. I'm like, well, if you don't want me to sell you something ever, like you're not going to like it here. Like I am a capitalist.
I said on my channel,
like,
I'm going to sell you stuff. How do you think I'm paying the bills? Like I have the small income. My fixed costs are really, they're nothing compared to living in California. I think my total monthly costs are probably about half as much as just rent alone would be for the same situation I'm in right now. So like, yeah, I don't need your money, but obviously I want to be compensated for my time, effort, and energy and trying to provide value to my audience. And as I grow, I expect that to increase as I grow.
well, and a lot of the best mentors I've had through my business career, I paid to be in the room with them at the first time I met them, right? Sometimes
Absolutely. That's how I met you.
Yeah, exactly. We're in a paid group. Sometimes you got to pay to be around the right people. And I don't know if it's not fair or not. It's the way the world works.
Oh, it's a game changer. Yep.
This has been a lot of fun. I think we're gonna do something on your channel not too long from now.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so I'll drop some links for your stuff in the description. And all right, everybody, we'll catch you next time.
Likewise. Take care.